Zach was hired by a mysterious person to clean an old, empty building, but he didn't expect to find a room full of snakes. As soon as he stepped into one of the rooms, he immediately disliked seeing all the snakes, but there was more going on. These snakes were acting strangely aggressive, something Zach had never seen before. Then he noticed something underneath them. It seemed like the snakes were guarding something important. Zach felt uneasy and shocked. This wasn't a good sign. As he tried to get closer to the object, the snakes became more alert. He knew he had to be very careful, but when he reached for the object, one of the snakes bit him, sending sharp pain through his arm. He realized he couldn't do this alone. He rushed back to his van parked outside the house. After putting on a bandage, the pain in his arm was still intense. He thought about quitting, but the large amount of money he had been promised made him pause. Just then his phone rang. It was an unknown number. When he answered, the voice on the other end told him to hurry, or something bad would happen. Zach looked around. It felt like someone was watching him. What was really going on? The person on the phone threatened him, saying that if he didn't deliver the object that same day, something terrible would happen to him and his family. Zach was in complete shock. This situation couldn't end well for him. Summoning his courage, Zach thought about calling the police. But when they answered, he hung up. He couldn't risk his family's safety. It was far too dangerous. He decided he would just finish cleaning the room and give the contractor whatever they wanted. He resolved not to call anyone for help, unsure of who had even hired him in the first place. He needed better protective gear, but the bite on his arm was becoming more painful. Zach quickly drove back to his house, all the while feeling like he was being watched, though he saw no one. Deep down, he knew he needed medical attention, but he was determined to get the object out of that room first. Reluctantly, Zach returned to the building. As he walked up the massive staircase, he could already hear the hissing of the snakes. Strangely, there were no snakes outside the room, only inside. When he entered the room again, his jaw dropped. There were even more snakes now. They turned to face him instantly, very aware of his presence. However, they didn't attack him outright. It was only when he got closer that they reacted. Zach was in complete shock. He couldn't help but wonder how he had gotten into this situation. He should have never taken the job. He had only been hired to clean out the abandoned building. He hadn't anticipated anything like this, but now he knew he had no choice but to follow through. This would all be over soon. Zach had worked difficult jobs before, but he had never disliked one as much as this. There was extra pressure on him. Zach quickly tried to make his way through the snakes. His protective suit helped a lot, but then he felt something holding him back. It wasn't just a feeling. One of the snakes had started constricting his movements. He tried to break free, but Zach didn't know what to do. He wanted to give up, but he was so close. Snakes began to crawl around his feet, and Zach tripped. This could be the end. Zach felt extremely constricted. The snakes kept circling him, and some started biting his suit. He knew this wouldn't end well. He managed to crawl back up, but every ounce of his strength was focused on the object in the room. Soon, he began to feel sharp pain throughout his body. The snakes had managed to penetrate his suit on his right leg. He tried kicking them off, but one snake bit him. Zach started feeling sick and then sensed something wrapping around his neck. He fell to the ground, gasping for air. He had never felt like this before. It was as if the snakes were strangling him. Zach kept struggling to breathe, trying to throw the snake off, but it had completely coiled around his neck, tightening its grip. Then, by some miracle, the snake loosened its hold. Zach wasn't sure if it was because he had poked it in the eye, or if something else had distracted it. He thought he heard footsteps, but maybe it was just the lack of oxygen messing with his mind. However, Zach wasn't entirely wrong. Between the snakes constricting him and the lack of air, he felt terrible. He dragged himself into the hallway but realized he had no strength left to get up. He hadn't told anyone where he was, yet he still heard voices. Were they in his head? Zach couldn't take it anymore. He drifted in and out of consciousness until he finally blacked out. When he opened his eyes, he wasn't in the hallway anymore, he was downstairs. How did that happen? All around him were people, and Zach had no idea what was going on. These people didn't seem friendly at all. He overheard a conversation between two men. They were discussing what to do with him, saying he knew too much. Eventually, Zach was dragged away. He realized he wasn't safe at all. These people had bad intentions. They loaded him into a white van and drove him away. Zach tried shouting, but nothing came out of his mouth. He was too scared. Zach still had no idea what was happening. A man in a black hoodie sat next to him and noticed that Zach was awake. He instantly alerted the driver, and another man came into the back. Without asking if Zach was okay, they began questioning him. Zach recognized one of the voices. It was the same man who had called him that morning. The man asked if Zach had gotten hold of the item in the room. Zach was too weak to speak and just shook his head. They weren't satisfied with his answer, and Zach blacked out again. When Zach woke up, he was hooked up to a monitor. As he looked around, he realized he was alone in a creepy room. Zach had no clue what was happening. He tried to get up but found that he was strapped to the bed. Then someone entered the room. It was a man who looked like a doctor. He had stitched up Zach and provided him with care, but the man looked extremely nervous. Zach begged him to let him go, but the doctor remained silent and nodded toward a camera. Two men came into the dark room and unstrapped Zach. He was dragged into another room, which looked more like an interrogation room. Zach begged them to let him go, but they wouldn't budge. They kept asking him question after question. Zach was asked if he knew what they were looking for, but he had no idea. Still, he had a feeling it had something to do with the house and the snakes. They seemed to need something very special or sensitive from that room and wanted someone else to retrieve it, without risking themselves. They asked if Zach had told anyone about the job. Zach assured them he hadn't told a soul, not even his wife. He was terrified. The men seemed to believe him, but then there was a loud bang. Zach was extremely confused. One of the men got up and quickly ran away. Zach didn't know what to do and stayed seated, hearing shouting and gunfire. This wasn't a good sign. Then something rolled into the room, and suddenly he was blinded. Lying on the floor, he covered his ears to block the loud noises. Someone grabbed him and told him to stay low. That's when Zach realized a SWAT team had broken in, arriving just in time to get him out of a dangerous situation. Zach had so many questions. How did they find him? Were they there for him? Outside, he saw the two men who had been questioning him earlier, both arrested. Zach felt relieved but still had questions. He was exhausted, but he knew he needed to tell them about the house. The team explained that they weren't there for him. His rescue was just pure luck. They had enough information to arrest the criminal group holding him. Zach then started telling them about the snakes, and though the SWAT team found his story hard to believe, Zach showed them his bite marks as proof. Zach led them to the house, which took some time. When they arrived, they were shocked to see that his car had been completely burned by the criminals. Inside the building, they heard loud hissing from the snakes. Some of the men were afraid of snakes and decided to wait for a special team before entering the room. Zach didn't want to go in by himself, and no one could blame him. He had almost died the last time he tried. Zach knew someone in the police who could gather a team quickly. He called the headquarters, and within minutes, the team arrived, all wearing protective suits. Zach felt relieved, finally feeling safer with so many people around. He had also heard that the police had picked up his wife and children to keep them safe. The criminals were mostly caught, but it was too risky to assume they wouldn't retaliate. Zach gave the team directions to the room, and they listened carefully, eager to solve the mystery. As the police entered, they secured the area and began clearing out the snakes. Things seemed to go smoother than Zach's attempt, but soon they needed backup due to the aggressive snakes guarding something. Loud noises and screams erupted as the team faced more trouble than expected. Someone suggested burning the building, but authorities wanted to find out what the snakes were protecting. More forces arrived, including Homeland Security. The captain told Zach to go home, promising to update him the next day. To Zach's surprise, the next day's call came from the mayor, asking him to come to the office. Unsure if it was good or bad news, Zach went with his family. There, the mayor told him the criminal organization was arrested and Zach was safe. The police captain also honored Zach with a bravery medal. They explained the snakes were protecting their valuable eggs, which the criminals wanted. Zach finally felt relieved that it was all over.